So why is it that some companies just thrive in total chaos while others completely fail? In this explainer, we're going to break down the research from the book Great by Choice to really get at the secrets of what it takes to not just survive, but actually win when the world feels unpredictable. And let me tell you, the answers, they're probably not what you're thinking.
All right, so to kick things off, we're not starting in some fancy boardroom. Nope, we're going back to 1911, to a 1,400-mile race to the South Pole. You can think of it as a near-perfect experiment, right? You've got two teams, the exact same goal, and the same absolutely brutal environment. The outcome, though, well, it couldn't have been more different.
So on one side, you have Roald Amundsen. This guy was just obsessed with preparation. He studied methods from native experts, he used proven tech, dog sleds, and he built these massive supply buffers. The man was disciplined. And then you've got Robert Falcon Scott. He took a totally different approach. He gambled on these brand new untested motor sledges, whose engines, surprise, surprise, cracked in the freezing cold. He ran his supplies dangerously thin and pushed his men to absolute exhaustion on the good days, which meant they had nothing left in the tank for the bad ones.
So what happened? Well, Amundsen's team not only reached the South Pole, they got back to base camp on the exact day he'd planned from the start. Scott's team? They made it to the pole too, but they found Amundsen's flag already waiting for them. Totally demoralized, out of supplies, Scott and his entire party froze to death on the way back, just a few miles from safety. Think about that. Their circumstances weren't different. It was their choices. And that single difference, that's the key to everything we're going to talk about.
Okay, so how does a race in Antarctica connect to the world of business? Well, researchers took this idea and started studying the most chaotic industries you can imagine. Think airlines, biotech. They went looking for leaders who acted like Amundsen, and guess what? They found them. And these leaders, they weren't just successful. They were in a whole other league.
They got this nickname 10Xers. Why? Because they didn't just succeed, they beat their industry's average performance by at least 10 times. So what was their secret weapon? It wasn't a booming economy, and it wasn't just getting lucky. Nope. It was a very specific mindset, a set of core behaviors that every single one of them shared.
The research really boils it all down to these three core behaviors that work together. First up, you've got fanatic discipline. This is all about relentless consistency, staying true to your values and long-term goals no matter what pressures are coming from the outside. Then, that discipline is guided by empirical creativity. This just means you don't make bold moves on a whim, you make them only after you have real, hard evidence, direct observation. And finally, it's all wrapped up in what they call productive paranoia. That's staying hypervigilant, always assuming things could turn against you at any moment. And because of that, you prepare, obsessively.
And here's a fantastic example of productive paranoia in action. Early on at Microsoft, Bill Gates insisted on this rule. You can imagine it drove his colleagues nuts. They saw it as just hoarding cash. But Gates got it. He understood that this cash buffer was his version of Amundsen's extra supplies. It was the oxygen that would let Microsoft survive any catastrophe, and that's a huge reason they were ultimately able to thrive.
Okay, so that's the mindset. But how did these 10Xers actually put it into practice? What did they do? Well, they used a practical toolkit that really comes down to two powerful, kind of metaphorical ideas: marching at a steady pace and knowing exactly when to fire your cannons.
The first tool is something they call the 20-mile march. Just imagine this. You're walking across the entire country. You make a commitment to walk exactly 20 miles every single day. So on those awful snowy days, you push yourself, you dig deep, and you hit your 20 miles. But here's the crucial part. On the beautiful sunny days, when you feel great and you could do 40, you have the discipline to hold back and just stick to 20. That consistency is what builds unstoppable momentum and keeps you from burning out right before a big storm hits.
And here's a real-world example. For the medical device company Stryker, their 20-mile march was a number: 20% annual net income growth. For over 20 years, the CEO, John Brown, made this target the law. They would push like crazy to hit it in the tough years, and, this is so important, they had the discipline to actually hold back from growing faster than that during the good years.
And this is such a stark contrast to their main rival at the time, USC. While Stryker was marching at steady 20 miles, USC was just sprinting. They were chasing this explosive, totally unsustainable growth. But then what happens? The industry hits a downturn, and USC,
completely overextended and exhausted, just collapsed. Meanwhile, Stryker, who had conserved its energy, they thrived. It's a perfect case study. In a chaotic world, consistency really is king. Okay, so the second tool, this one comes from another big surprise in the research, and it's all about innovation. You'd think the 10X companies were the most innovative, right? Well, not necessarily. In fact, some of them, like Southwest Airlines, were basically copycats. Their real advantage, their secret sauce, wasn't what they innovated. It was how. See, 10Xers start by firing what the book calls bullets. Think of these as small, low-cost, low-risk experiments to just see what works. Take a look at the biotech firm Amgen. In their early days, they were exploring a whole range of different projects, stuff like a hepatitis B vaccine, immunoassays, even chicken growth hormone. Each one of those was a bullet, fired to gather real-world data without, betting the farm.
But, and here's the payoff, once one of those bullets hits the mark, once they have that empirical proof that an idea actually works, that's when they concentrate all their resources and fire a big, calibrated cannonball. For Amgen, that cannonball was EPO, a breakthrough treatment for anemia. And that one single, well-aimed bet, which was based on the success of a tiny bullet, is what turned them into an absolute powerhouse.
But hang on a second. What about luck? I mean, maybe these 10X companies just got a bunch of lucky breaks that their competitors didn't, right? This is a great question. And the researchers were obsessed with it too, so they decided to actually try and measure the role of luck systematically. So to answer this, first they had to define what a luck event even is. They decided it's any significant event, positive or negative, that's pretty much outside the company's control and couldn't have been predicted. Then they did the hard work. They went through the entire history of all 14 companies in the study, and they documented every single one of these luck events they could find.
And the results were just stunning. The 10X companies were not luckier. It turned out they had a very similar number of both good and bad luck events as their less successful rivals. So luck, it just wasn't the thing that set them apart.
So this leads to a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. You've heard the saying, it's not the hand you're dealt, it's how you play it. Well, that's exactly it. The study calls this concept return on luck, or ROL. The 10Xers were just masters at getting a huge return on their luck, capitalizing on the good stuff, and maybe even more importantly, turning bad luck into a huge opportunity.
Just look at Progressive Insurance. Back in the late 80s, California passed a new regulation that the entire industry saw as a complete catastrophe, a huge bad luck event. But the CEO, Peter Lewis, he saw it as a gift. It forced them to totally reinvent their claims process, and that led to their famous immediate response service, which became this massive competitive advantage. They got an incredible return on really bad luck.
So what does all this add up to? All this talk of discipline and evidence and paranoia and luck. Well, it all points to the single most powerful conclusion from this entire 9-year research project, and that is, thriving in an uncertain world, it's not a matter of circumstance.
There's that great quote from Peter Drucker, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And that's what the 10Xers showed us, that success in a chaotic world doesn't just fall into your lap because of some visionary genius or a charismatic personality or a lucky roll of the dice. No, it comes from making a conscious choice. The choice to operate with that fanatic discipline, that empirical creativity, and that productive paranoia.
So these tools of the 10Xers, the 20-mile march, firing bullets than cannonballs, getting a high return on luck, these aren't just for big-shot CEOs. They are real, practical principles that any of us can use to navigate our own uncertainties, in a career, a personal project, even our own business. Because greatness, in the end, isn't a circumstance, it's a choice. The world is always going to be uncertain, so the only real question is, what choice will you make?